When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. Not because it didn't hurt. It did, more than anything ever had. But because, in that moment, I realized she wasn't being cruel. She was just being honest. And maybe, deep down, I had known the truth for a while. They were happier without me. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning, holding a cup of lukewarm tea. The rain outside was tapping softly on the window, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. My son, Daniel, had already left for work. My granddaughter, Lily, was in her room getting ready for school. Only Anna, my daughter-in-law, and I were in the house. The silence between us had grown thicker over the years. It used to be filled with little conversations, small laughter, and morning chatter about groceries or recipes. But now it was just silence. She was standing by the sink, washing a few dishes, when she said it. Not with anger, not even with tears. Just quietly. "Mom, maybe you should think about living somewhere else for a while." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. I felt my hands tremble slightly as I placed my cup on the counter. "Somewhere else?" I asked, pretending not to understand. She turned, drying her hands on a towel. "It's just, the house feels crowded lately. Daniel and I barely get any time to ourselves. You deserve peace too." Peace. That word stayed with me. It sounded like kindness, but it wasn't. It was goodbye wrapped in politeness. I wanted to say something, to ask if I had done something wrong, if I'd been in the way, if my cooking or my presence or my breathing had somehow become too much. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. A quiet, broken smile. Because what else could a mother do when her own son's home no longer felt like hers? That morning, as the rain kept falling, I realized that sometimes love fades quietly, not with shouting or blame, but with soft silences and polite goodbyes. And I told myself I would leave with dignity. I would not cry. But later that night, when I heard them laughing together in the living room, I sat alone in my small room and let the tears come anyway. My name is Margaret. I'm 65 years old, though lately I feel much older. My husband passed away nearly 10 years ago, and for most of that time, I've lived with my son Daniel and his family. When my husband, Robert, was alive, life had rhythm. He had a deep laugh that could fill the whole house. He was the one who always reminded me that family meant staying close, no matter how life changed. After his passing, Daniel insisted I move in with him. "You shouldn't live alone, Mom," he said. "We'll take care of you." Back then, I believed him. Their home was beautiful, larger than anything Robert and I ever had. A 2-story house with white curtains, a garden out front, and a warm kitchen that always smelled of coffee and toast in the mornings. When I first moved in, Anna, my daughter-in-law, welcomed me with open arms. She was kind and gentle, and she always spoke to me with respect. We spent afternoons cooking together, sharing stories and laughing about Daniel's childhood. I remember once in those early months, she said, "You've raised such a good man, Mom. Daniel is so caring." I smiled and said, "He takes after his father." Back then, everything felt right. I helped around the house, picked Lily up from kindergarten, cooked dinners when Anna worked late, and sat on the porch with my knitting while watching the sunset. But time has a way of changing things, quietly. It started with small moments, moments so gentle I almost miss them. Like when Anna stopped asking for my help in the kitchen, or when Daniel began eating dinner later, saying he was tired from work, or when Lily started spending more time in her room, glued to her phone instead of talking to me. I told myself it was normal. Families change, children grow, people get busy. But deep inside, something in the air shifted. The laughter that once filled the house became rare. The warmth I used to feel at the dining table started to fade. And sometimes, when I walked into a room, I could feel their conversation pause, just for a second, before they resumed, softer than before. I remember one evening, about a year ago, when it truly hit me. I had made my special chicken stew, Daniel's favorite since he was a boy. I spent the whole afternoon preparing it, humming to myself, remembering how Robert used to help me chop the vegetables. When I placed the pot on the table, Daniel smiled faintly. "Smells good, Mom," he said. But Anna barely looked up from her phone. And Lily, who used to ask for seconds, said quietly, "Can we order pizza instead tonight?" I laughed, a soft, shaky laugh. "Pizza? You used to love Grandma's stew." Lily shrugged. "I just don't feel like it today." Daniel looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. "Maybe tomorrow, Mom. Let's just order something easy tonight, okay?" I nodded, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending the tears in my eyes were just from the onions I'd cut earlier. That night, as I cleaned the untouched stew from the table, I realized that I was slowly becoming a guest in my own family's home. But I stayed, because that's what mothers do. We stay, even when we feel invisible, even when our hearts ache quietly. I told myself that my presence still mattered, that Daniel still needed me, that Lily would still remember our bedtime stories. And sometimes there were glimpses of that love again. On the Sunday mornings, Daniel would sit beside me with his coffee, talking about his work. When Anna's car broke down, I lent her my savings to help fix it. And when Lily had a fever, I stayed up all night by her bedside, whispering lullabies, just like I used to sing to Daniel when he was small. Those moments reminded me that I still had a place, even if it was small, even if it was fading. But as the months passed, the distance grew again. Anna started working from home, spending most of her time in her office. Daniel came home late, often too tired to talk. Lily became a teenager, moody and private, speaking in one-word answers. Dinner became quieter. The house became colder. And my room, once filled with my things, started to feel like a corner someone forgot to pack away. I started spending more time sitting by the window, watching the rain, listening to the world outside. I would see neighbors walking together, laughing, living their lives. And I wondered if maybe I had made a mistake by staying so long. Sometimes I thought about moving out, but where would I go? The small pension I had wasn't enough for rent, and I didn't want to burden Daniel with expenses. So I stayed, even when the silence became unbearable. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people you love and still feeling unseen. I began noticing small details that broke my heart. The way Anna would look tired whenever I entered the room. The way Daniel avoided family photos that included me. the way Lily started calling her other grandmother, Anna's mother, Grandma, with excitement, while I became Grandma Maggie in a softer, distant tone. It's strange how names can hold distance. I tried to bridge the gap, baking cookies, organizing family dinners, helping with chores, but somehow everything I did seemed to make things harder. Older women telling her story. Anna would politely say, "You don't need to do that, Mom." Daniel would say, "You should rest more." Lily would say, "Thanks," but never really look up. And so, slowly, I did less. I cooked less. I spoke less. I existed quietly, like a piece of old furniture in the corner of a once busy room. Then, one morning, the rain returned. The air was cool and gray, and the world felt still. I remember hearing soft music from Anna's phone, cheerful, upbeat, while she was making breakfast. Daniel had already left for work, and Lily was packing her bag. I walked into the kitchen, smiling, and said, "I can make her lunch today." Anna looked up, her smile polite but strained. "It's okay, Mom. I already did." "Oh," I said softly. "All right." Lily barely glanced at me. She muttered, "Bye, Gamma," and rushed out the door. The sound of the door closing felt heavier than usual. Anna continued washing the dishes in silence. I stood there, unsure whether to sit or leave, when she suddenly turned around. That was when she said it. "Mom, maybe you should think about living somewhere else for a while." Those words didn't surprise me. I had felt them coming for months, maybe years, but hearing them out loud made them real. In that moment, I understood something painful, but true. You can love someone deeply and still become a burden to them. That's what regret feels like. Not the regret of what you did wrong, but the regret of staying too long where love has quietly faded. I smiled because I didn't want her to see how much it hurt. I said, "Of course, dear, I understand." She looked relieved, and that, more than anything, broke me. Because when someone feels relieved that you'll be gone, you realize how heavy your presence had become. That night, as the house grew quiet, I began packing a few of my things. My old photo albums, Robert's watch, a scarf Daniel bought me years ago, a few clothes. I didn't know where I would go yet, but I knew I couldn't stay. I sat on the edge of the bed, the rain still whispering against the window, and thought about all the years I had spent trying to be needed, trying to belong. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the kindest thing I could do for my family was to let them be happy without me. That night, after Anna's words, I sat for a long time staring at the half-packed suitcase by my bed. I could hear faint laughter from the living room, the sound of the television, the clinking of plates, Lily's young voice. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It sounded like a life that no longer included me. I held my husband Robert's old watch in my hands. It was scratched and quiet now, long stopped ticking. I used to plan on giving it to Daniel one day, maybe when he turned 50, but now I wasn't sure he would want it. As I wrapped the watch in tissue and placed it in the corner of my suitcase, I realized something I had never wanted to admit before. I had built my whole world around people who no longer needed me to exist in theirs. The next morning, I decided not to mention anything about leaving. Not yet. I wanted to spend one last day, quietly, helping, cleaning, doing the small things that once made me feel useful. When Daniel came home from work that evening, he looked tired. He loosened his tie and sat at the table while I served dinner. I had made his favorite again, chicken stew, though I didn't expect anyone to notice. Anna joined us a few minutes later, scrolling through her phone as she sat down. Lily came down with her headphones on, mumbling a quick, "Hi." We ate in silence. The sound of the rain outside filled the space between our words. After a while, Daniel looked up and said, "Mom, Anna told me you've been thinking about getting your own place?" His voice was kind, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of relief and guilt. I wanted to spend one last day, quietly, helping, cleaning, doing the small things that once made me feel useful. When Daniel came home from work that evening, he looked tired. He loosened his tie and sat at the table while I served dinner. I had made his favorite again, chicken stew, though I didn't expect anyone to notice. Anna joined us a few minutes later, scrolling through her phone as she sat down. Lily came down with her headphones on, mumbling a quick, "Hi." We ate in silence. The sound of the rain outside filled the space between our words. After a while, Daniel looked up and said, "Mom, Anna told me you've been thinking about getting your own place?" His voice was kind, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of relief and guilt. I put down my spoon and smiled. "Yes, dear. I think it might be good for everyone. I could find a small apartment nearby, somewhere quiet." Anna looked up briefly, then quickly down again. "That would be nice for you, Mom. You deserve your own space." Own space. Another polite goodbye. Daniel nodded. "I'll help you look this weekend. Maybe near the park? You like walking there." I smiled again, though my throat tightened. Yes, that sounds perfect. We finished dinner quietly. Lily excused herself first, saying she had homework. Anna gathered the dishes. Daniel thanked me for the meal. And as I sat there, watching them move through their lives, each with their own rhythm, their own plans, I realized that I had already become part of the background, a quiet shadow in a home that used to be mine. Over the next few days, I began preparing to leave. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't want anyone's pity. I just sorted through my things: old photographs, letters, clothes I hadn't worn in years. Most of what I owned could fit in 2 suitcases. The rest I left behind. I spent hours flipping through photo albums, touching the faces of people who were no longer here. Robert, smiling on our wedding day. Daniel as a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket. Family picnics, birthdays, holidays filled with laughter. It all felt like another lifetime. Once, Lily came into my room when I was packing. She leaned against the doorframe, her hair tied back, her phone in hand. "Grandma, are you going somewhere?" she asked. I forced a small smile. "Just thinking of moving out for a bit, sweetheart. Your mom and dad could use some space." She frowned. "But why?" I hesitated. Because sometimes people need room to grow, and that's okay. She didn't seem to understand, but she nodded anyway. Will you still visit? I reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Of course, my love. I'll always be nearby. She smiled faintly and went back to her room. I sat there long after she left, feeling both comforted and hollow. Children accept change so easily, perhaps because they haven't yet learned how heavy love can become. On Friday evening, Daniel took me to see a few small apartments. We visited 3. The first was dark and smelled faintly of dust. The second was cheerful, but expensive. The third one was quiet, a single room with a small balcony overlooking a row of trees. The sounds of distant birds and wind filled the air. I walked around slowly, touching the plain white walls. This one feels peaceful, I said softly. Daniel smiled, a little awkwardly. Yeah, it's not too far from here either. You could walk over any time. I nodded, pretending that meant something. We spoke to the landlord, a kind woman with gray hair who said the apartment was available right away. I agreed to move in within a week. On the way back home, Daniel turned on the radio. Soft old music played, a song I used to hum when he was little. He glanced at me and smiled faintly. You used to sing this to me, didn't you? I smiled back. Yes, you loved it. We both fell quiet. There was so much we could have said, but neither of us did. Some words, once lost, never find their way back. That night, I sat in my room and began writing a letter, not because I had to, but because I wanted to leave something behind. Dear Daniel, I'm proud of the man you've become. You've built a beautiful family and a good life. Don't ever think I'm sad about leaving. I'm just learning to let go gracefully. I know you love me, even if you don't say it often. I love you too, always. Take care of Anna and Lily. Be patient with them. And when you think of me, remember me as the woman who smiled, even when her heart was breaking. With love, Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, unsure if I'd ever give it to him. The next few days moved quietly. I began to notice small changes. Maybe they were always there, but now I saw them differently. Anna seemed lighter. She hummed while she cooked. She laughed more with Daniel. Even Lily seemed happier, her laughter echoing down the hall again. And I understood then, not with bitterness, but with clarity, that my leaving had already begun healing something in their home. It hurt to see it, but it also brought a strange kind of peace. Sometimes, love means stepping back so others can breathe again. On the last night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the quiet house, each step echoing softly against the wooden floor. The family photos on the wall looked back at me. Daniel as a boy, Anna and Lily smiling together, and a few old ones that still included me. I stopped in front of one, a picture from Daniel's wedding day. I was standing beside him, holding his arm, smiling so proudly. My eyes were full of hope that day. I reached out and touched the frame. "Thank you for letting me be part of your life," I whispered. Then I walked into the kitchen one last time. The same kitchen where Anna had told me to leave. It smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon. I placed a small note on the counter. Nothing long, just a few words. "Thank you for everything. Please take care of each other. Love, Mom." I knew they'd find it in the morning. At dawn, I quietly carried my suitcases out the door. The street was still wet from last night's rain. I paused for a moment on the porch, looking at the house. the windows glowing softly with early light. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel sad anymore. I just felt empty, but peaceful. Because for the first time, I wasn't holding on. I walked down the street slowly, the sound of my small suitcase wheels echoing behind me. Birds were beginning to sing. A few neighbors waved. I smiled back. Life was still moving, even without me. When I reached my new apartment later that morning, the landlord welcomes me warmly. She showed me where the kettle was, where to turn on the heater, and handed me a spare key. Once she left, I sat by the window, watching the light spill through the curtains. It was quiet, very quiet, but not the kind of silence that hurt. It was the kind that let me breathe. I unpacked slowly, placing my photo albums on a small shelf, Robert's watch on the nightstand, and a few books beside the bed. Then, for the first time in years, I made tea just for myself. It tasted different. Not better, not worse, just mine. Later that evening, I received a message on my phone. It was from Daniel. "Hi, Mom. Hope you settled in okay. Lily wants to visit you this weekend. She says she misses you already." I stared at the message for a long time, smiling faintly. Misses me already. The words felt warm, even if they were small. I typed back, "Tell her I miss her too. I'll bake cookies for her when she comes." He replied with a heart emoji. Nothing more. But that was enough. That night, I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the city outside. The air smelled like rain again. I thought about how life moves in circles, how children grow, how homes change, how love sometimes has to stretch and reshape itself to survive. And I realized something important. Maybe my family didn't push me away out of cruelty. Maybe they just needed space to live their own story. And maybe I needed space to remember mine. Her words pierced my heart for a second, but I hid it behind a gentle smile. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm glad." She didn't mean it cruelly. She was just telling the truth. And I realized then that was the point of all of this. They were happier, and that was enough. That night, after she left, I sat alone with a cup of tea and thought about what it really means to be a mother. It isn't about being needed every day. It isn't about living under the same roof. It's about giving and knowing when to step back. I thought of all the mothers I had known in my life, women who stayed too long in silence, who carried unspoken heartbreaks. And I wondered if this quiet acceptance was what love looked like after all the noise was gone. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. It was late afternoon and I was coming back from the park when I noticed Daniel standing outside my building. He looked out of place in his business clothes, holding a paper bag in his hand. "Daniel?" I called softly. He turned, surprised. "Mom, I was just about to call you." I smiled and motioned for him to come upstairs. Inside, he looked around the apartment and nodded approvingly. "It's nice here. Cozy," I said with a small laugh. He smiled. Then his expression grew serious. "He brought me some groceries. Anna thought you might need a few things." "That's kind of her," I said, taking the bag. Inside were apples, tea, and a jar of honey. My favorite. He sat down on the small sofa. "How have you been, Mom?" "Really?" I hesitated. "I'm all right, dear. It's quiet. but peaceful. She smiled knowingly. I moved here after my husband passed. It takes a while to get used to the quiet. Her words touched me. I realized we were both learning how to live with silence. After that day, we began meeting often, sharing tea, walking around the park, talking about books, recipes, and memories. It felt nice to have someone who didn't expect anything from me, who didn't see me as a burden, but simply as a person. Still, every evening when the sun dipped behind the trees, I thought of my family. I wondered what they were doing. Was Lily studying for her exams? Was Daniel still working late? Was Anna still playing music while she cooked? Sometimes I would take out my phone and look at our family chat. The messages were fewer now, mostly short updates. Hope you're okay, Mom. Or, Lily says hi. They weren't cold, but they weren't warm either. And yet, I replied to every one of them with a heart emoji or a cheerful message. Because love doesn't stop. It just changes its shape. A month later, Lily came to visit. The moment I opened the door, she rushed in with her backpack and hugged me tightly. "Grandma, your new place is so cute," she said, her eyes sparkling. I laughed softly. Cute? That's a new word for my little apartment. She looked around curiously, touching the curtains, peeking at the small balcony. She said, "It's cozy. Smells like cookies." "Well," I said with a smile, "that's because I baked some." We spent the afternoon together, baking, talking, and watching an old movie. She told me about her school, her friends, and how her mom was learning yoga now. When I asked how things were at home, she said, "Good. Everyone's happier lately." The older woman telling her story. The first few weeks in my new apartment passed like a long, gentle sigh. Everything was slower, quieter. The mornings were no longer filled with footsteps or clattering dishes, only the steady sound of birds and the occasional hum of a passing car. At first, the silence was comforting. I could make tea whenever I wanted. I could sit by the window for hours without feeling like I was in the way. No one rushed past me. No one corrected how I folded the towels. But slowly, that same silence began to feel heavy, too still, too deep. I found myself talking aloud sometimes, just to fill the air. Little things like, "Let's make soup today," or "You'd laugh at this, Robert." I didn't realize how much I had grown used to existing in the background of other people's noise until there was none left. Every morning, I would take a short walk to the park nearby. It wasn't large, but it had a pond and a few benches shaded by old oak trees. I liked to sit there and watch the children play, the dogs chase each other, and the couples walking hand in hand. Sometimes I brought breadcrumbs to feed the ducks. They always gathered eagerly, quacking softly. I smiled at them as if they were old friends. There was one woman I saw often. Her name was Ruth, around my age with silver hair and kind eyes. One morning, she sat beside me on the bench and said, "You're new around here, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Just moved in a few weeks ago." "Ah, fresh start?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Something like that." He nodded. "I'm glad." There was an awkward pause between us. the kind filled with everything unsaid. Finally, I asked softly, "How's Anna?" "She's fine, busy with work. She feels bad about how everything happened." I looked at him carefully. "Does she?" He sighed. "She didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. Things felt tense at home. You know how small spaces can make people tired?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I know." He looked at his hands, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I didn't realize how much we were depending on you. You did so much for us, cooking, helping with Lily. I think we took it for granted." I smiled faintly. "You didn't take me for granted, Daniel. You just grew up. That's what children are supposed to do." He looked up at me, eyes misty. "You always make it sound so easy." "It's not easy. It just hurts less when you stop fighting it." We sat in silence for a while. The air was soft and heavy with emotion. Before he left, he hugged me, really hugged me, for the first time in months. "Love you, Mom." "I love you too, son." When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long moment, holding on to the warmth of that hug like it was sunlight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about how strange love is, how it keeps flowing even when it's no longer returned in the same way. It doesn't disappear, it just finds a quieter place to live. As I sat by the window, I saw my reflection in the glass. My face looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, eyes softer. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel sorry for the woman looking back. I felt proud of her, because she had survived loving too much. A few days later, Ruth and I went for our usual walk in the park. The air was crisp, and the leaves were beginning to turn golden. She told me about her grandchildren, how they visited once a month and called her every Sunday. I smiled and said, "That's lovely. You must miss them." "I do," she said, "but I don't want to be in the middle of their lives all the time. They need their own space to grow. My job is to love them from a distance." Her words echoed in my mind long after she said them. Love them from a distance. Maybe that was what I had been trying to learn all along. That evening, I took out my old photo albums again. For the first time, I didn't cry. I looked at the pictures and felt gratitude instead of loss. Because every moment, even the painful ones, had brought me here, to this quiet room, where I could finally see love clearly, without the noise of expectation. A week later, I received a call from Anna. "Mom," she said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, dear. How are you?" "I'm okay. I wanted to thank you for everything, for helping us, for being patient. I know I didn't make it easy for you." Her voice trembled slightly, and I could hear the sincerity in it. I took a deep breath. "It's all right, Anna. I understand. I just wanted you to know that we're really grateful. And Lily keeps talking about you. She misses your stories." I smiled. "She can visit any time." "I know. We'll come by soon." When we hung up, I sat there quietly, letting her words sink in. There was no promise of things going back to how they were, just a soft understanding that maybe, in time, love could return in a gentler form. And that was enough. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I had started doing since moving here. I used to think love meant being needed, but now I see it means being remembered kindly. I may not be part of their daily life anymore, but I am part of who they are. And that is enough for me. As I closed the journal and looked out the window at the quiet city lights, I realized this was my turning point. Not a dramatic moment of confrontation or tears, but a quiet, steady acceptance. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for a call or an invitation or an apology. I was just living. And somehow, that felt like peace. The days grew cooler as autumn deepened. I found myself falling into a gentle rhythm. Mornings with tea, afternoons in the park, evenings spent with soft music and the pages of my journal. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I was beginning to cherish. One morning, I awoke to the sound of rain against the window, the kind of steady, unhurried rain that makes everything outside look softer, kinder. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat by the window with my tea. As the world blurred in mist, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. Not the calm of having everything I wanted, but the calm of no longer fighting what I couldn't change. I realized that peace isn't something that arrives with fanfare. It slips in quietly once you stop arguing with the past. That afternoon, Ruth came over with a small box of scones. Fresh from the bakery, she said proudly, and still warm. We sat together, the rain whispering outside, the kettle humming softly between us. She asked about my son, about my granddaughter, and I told her the truth, that things were better. Not perfect, but better. I think they're learning too, I said, to love me from a distance. Ruth smiled. That's the hardest kind of love, the one that asks for space. I nodded. Yes, but it's also the kind that lasts. That night, I took up my knitting needles, something I hadn't touched in years. I began to knit a soft gray scarf for Lily. As the yarn slipped through my fingers, I thought about the threads that hold families together. Invisible, delicate, but strong. Each loop, each knot felt like a small prayer for forgiveness, for peace, for understanding. A few weeks later, I was walking through the market when I heard someone call my name. Mrs. Harlow. I turned to see Anna approaching, holding Lily's hand. Both were smiling. Mom, Anna said softly, we were nearby and thought we'd stop by. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I smiled. That's a lovely surprise. We walked through the market together, tasting apples, buying flowers, laughing at little things. It felt natural, unforced. There was no tension, no weight of unspoken guilt. Just 3 women, 3 generations, sharing a simple afternoon. When we reached my apartment, Anna helped me put the groceries away. She looked around with a faint smile. She said, "You've made this place feel like home." I glanced around at the little touches. Framed photos, potted plants, Ruth's flowers by the window. I suppose I have. Lily ran to the window and gasped, "Grandma, you can see the park from here." "Yes, that's where I go every morning," I said. Anna smiled. "She's been talking about visiting you for weeks." I looked at my daughter, her eyes softer now, her voice gentler. Something had shifted between us, not in words, but in presence. Maybe she finally saw me, not as the person who once overstepped, but as someone who had learned to step back with love. After they left, I stood by the door for a long time, smiling through quiet tears. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. No apologies, no promises to move back in together. Just small gestures, presence, warmth, sincerity. And that was enough. Winter came. The trees outside my window stood bare and still. But inside, my apartment felt warm, not from the heater, but from the quiet sense of belonging I carried now. Every Sunday, Lily called. Sometimes Anna joined. We didn't always talk about much, just little things, small stories, but that was love too, in its simplest form. Sometimes Daniel visited after work. He brought coffee and we talked about nothing important. He didn't always stay long, but every time he left, he hugged me tightly. I didn't need anything more than that. One evening, as I sat writing in my journal, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The years of giving too much, the heartbreak of realizing I had become unwanted, the slow, painful process of stepping away, and now, this quiet peace. I wrote, "It wasn't their fault, and it wasn't mine. Families grow. Love stretches. Sometimes it pulls us apart before it pulls us closer again." Spring arrived like a soft promise. The park bloomed with daffodils. The air smelled fresh, and I began taking longer walks again. One morning, Ruth brought her camera and asked, "Would you like me to take a picture of you here?" I laughed. Oh, I haven't liked a picture of myself in years. She insisted anyway. "You should have one, to remember this season." So I stood by the pond, sunlight on my face, and smiled. Not the smile I used to give the family photos, the practice one meant to prove I was happy, but a real one. A soft, quiet smile of a woman who had finally made peace with her story. When Ruth showed me the picture, I almost didn't recognize the woman in it. She looked older, yes, but also lighter, as if she had put down a burden she'd been carrying for too long. That evening, I sent the photo to Anna with a short message. "I'm doing well, dear. Don't worry about me. Love, Mom." A few minutes later, she replied, "You look beautiful, Mom. We love you too." It was simple, but it made my eyes sting. Because love doesn't always need long speeches. Sometimes it's just a few words that say, "I see you now." Months passed. Life moved gently. I started volunteering twice a week at the local library, reading stories to children. Their laughter filled the quiet corners of my days, and I found joy again in small voices and open smiles. Sometimes, as I packed up my books, I would think, maybe this was what I had been meant to do all along. To give love freely, not just to my family, but to the world around me. One afternoon, Lily surprised me again. She ran up to me after my reading session and hugged me tightly. "Grandma, Mom said we can stay the weekend." I laughed, tears filling my eyes. "Well, then we'd better bake cookies." We spent the evening together, laughing, baking, sharing stories. And as Lily drifted to sleep beside me, I whispered softly, "You are my peace, little one." Later that night, Anna came to the living room. We sat together in silence, watching the rain tap against the window. After a while, she said quietly, "Mom, I used to think you were too involved, that you didn't trust us to manage our lives. but now I see you just loved us too deeply." I looked at her, heart full, and I didn't know how to let go gently, I admitted. We both smiled through tears. No anger, no blame, just understanding. It was the kind of forgiveness that doesn't need to be spoken loudly to be felt. That night, when I went to bed, I felt something shift inside me. Not just peace, but gratitude. Because the love I thought I had lost was still there. Quieter, yes, but deeper. It no longer demanded to be seen or heard. It simply existed. And I realized maybe that's how mothers love best. Not at the center of their children's worlds, but quietly at the edges, keeping the light on. Weeks later, on my 66th birthday, I woke to find a knock at my door. When I opened it, there stood Anna, Daniel, and Lily, holding flowers, balloons, and a small cake. "Surprise!" they shouted. I laughed and pulled them all into a hug. It wasn't a grand party, just laughter, tea, and soft music, but it was perfect. As the candles flickered, I closed my eyes and made a wish, not for anything new, but for what I already had: peace, understanding, love, quiet, steady, and real. Later that night, after they left, I sat alone again in my little apartment. But this time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt full, full of memories, warmth, and the echo of laughter that lingered in the air. I whispered to myself, "You did it, Margaret. You let them go, and they found their way back, not because they needed you, but because they loved you." And that, I realized, was the sweetest ending of all. It's been nearly 2 years now since I left that big house on Willow Lane. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the hallway, and the soft creak of the kitchen door I used to open every morning before anyone else was awake. Back then, I used to think a house filled with people meant a home filled with love. Now I know better. A home isn't about how many voices it holds. It's about how much peace you feel when you sit quietly within its walls. My days have slowed down in a way I once feared, but now cherish. I wake up early, just as the sky begins to glow. I brew my tea, always the same brand, the one Daniel used to bring me when he came home late from work, and I sit by the window watching the light change. Sometimes I talk to myself, not out of loneliness, but as a way of keeping company with my own thoughts. I'll say things like, "Remember when you thought you'd never smile again?" And I'll smile anyway, because life has a funny way of healing you quietly while you're busy learning to breathe through the pain. There are moments when memories still hurt. Birthdays, holidays, the sound of a child calling for their mother at the park. But now, instead of breaking me, they soften me. They remind me that I once had something beautiful. A chapter that ended, yes, but one that I'm grateful to have lived. One morning, I decided to visit my old neighborhood. It wasn't planned. I was out buying vegetables when I saw the bus that passed by Willow Lane. Without thinking, I got on. The streets hadn't changed much. The same bakery with the crooked sign, the same little bookstore that still smelled of paper and dust. When the bus stopped, I stepped off and just stood there, looking at that familiar stretch of road. And there it was, the house, my old home. The curtains were different, the garden a little overgrown, but it still looked the same to me. I didn't go up to the door. I just stood at the gate for a while, listening to the faint sound of voices inside. Laughter, light, life. And I realized they really were happier now. Not because I was gone, but because they had grown into their own rhythm, one that no longer depended on me. And strangely, that didn't hurt anymore. It felt right. I walked away quietly, the autumn wind brushing against my face. There was no sadness, no bitterness, just a calm acceptance that some chapters are meant to close gently, without anger or regret. When I got home, I made myself some soup and sat with my old photo album. I traced the edges of pictures, Daniel as a little boy, smiling with missing teeth, Anna holding Lily for the first time. All the laughter, the small moments, the chaos of love that once filled my world. I whispered softly, "Thank you for all of it." It was the first time I had ever thanked my past instead of mourning it. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, Daniel's. He wrote, "Mom, Lily has a school project about family stories. She wants to interview you about your life. Would you be up for it this weekend?" I laughed when I read it, the kind of soft, surprised laugh that warms the chest. Of course I said yes. That weekend, they came over. Lily brought her little recorder and notebook. She asked questions like, "Grandma, what was Daddy like when he was my age? And what's your happiest memory?" I answered every question slowly, carefully, not because I had to think hard, but because I wanted to savor every word. When we finished, Lily hugged me tight. "You have so many stories, Grandma," she said. "I want to be like you when I grow up, kind and strong." Tears filled my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "You already are, my dear." Anna smiled at me from across the room. There was understanding in her eyes now, the kind that comes only after time, distance, and love have done their quiet work. That night, after they left, I replayed Lily's recording. Hearing my own voice telling old stories made me realize something. Maybe my role as a mother wasn't to be needed forever. Maybe it was to give enough love that even when I stepped back, it kept guiding them. Love doesn't disappear when you're no longer in the center. It becomes the air that holds everything together, unseen but always there. The next morning, I sat down with my journal again and wrote, "Once I cried because they stopped needing me. Now I smile because they learned how to live just as I taught them." And that, I think, is the truest form of love. Months have passed since then. I've grown used to the rhythm of my quiet life, the creak of my chair, the hum of the kettle, the slow turning of pages. Every now and then, I still catch myself waiting for a knock at the door. But when it doesn't come, I'm not sad anymore, because I know Love doesn't always knock. Sometimes it simply lingers in the walls, in the memories, in the silence that feels like home. I've made new friends too, women like me who once believed their worth ended when their children grew up. We meet on Thursdays for tea and share pieces of our hearts, the stories we never told anyone, the regrets that turned into lessons. One of them, Helen, said to me once, "Do you ever wish you could go back?" I thought for a long moment and said, "No, I just wished I had loved myself sooner." She smiled and squeezed my hand. That's the hardest love to learn. She was right. Sometimes at night, I sit on my balcony and watch the city lights flicker below. It's funny how many windows glow at the same time, each one a little story, each one holding laughter, arguments, forgiveness. And I realize maybe we're all just stories, trying to be understood, trying to find peace in our own imperfect ways. One evening, as I was locking the door, I found an envelope slipped underneath it. It was a drawing, Lily's handwriting again. A picture of me, her parents, and herself, holding hands. At the bottom, she had written in big, uneven letters, "Family is forever." I sat down on the floor, holding that drawing to my chest, and cried softly, not from sadness, but from the purest kind of love, because in her little heart, I had never been gone. Now, every time I look at that picture, I smile. It sits framed on my table, beside my teacup, and when the morning light touches it, I whisper to myself, "This is what love looks like when it grows up." The day I realized my family was happier without me, I thought it was the end of my story. But now I see it differently. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a different kind of happiness, one built on acceptance, not expectation, on love without possession, on letting go, but never stopping to care. So if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of a closed door, with tears in your eyes and silence in your chest, remember this: you are still loved, even if the world has grown quieter, even if your place in it has changed. Because love, real love, doesn't vanish when life rearranges itself. It just finds new ways to stay. Sometimes in a phone call, sometimes in a child's drawing, and sometimes in the peace of your own heart.